Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the Bee's Knees by the Big Cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 4, Day 3. But first, let's do our daily punishment. My friend's bakery burned down. Now his business is toast. Key terms for today: Harriet Beecher Stowe, Hinton Helper, the New England Emigrant Company, Bleeding Kansas, the Lecompton Constitution, the Potomac Massacre, John Brown, Charles Sumner, James Buchanan, John C. Frémont, Dred Scott, Financial Crisis of 1857, Abraham Lincoln, the Freeport Doctrine, John Brown, the Election of 1860, the Constitutional Union Party, and the Crittenden Compromise. We're going to go over Bleeding Kansas, the effect of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Dred Scott decision, the rise of Abraham Lincoln, and the election of 1860 and the secession of the South. This will take us from 1854 to 1860. So there were some authors during this time that are going to help increase tension. The first one is Harriet Beecher Stowe, who we've mentioned before. She writes Uncle Tom's Cabin, which talked about how bad slavery was. It's going to help spark the Civil War. It's going to give the Northern abolitionists moral ammunition. It will be inspired by the Underground Railroad. It's about harsh slavery in the South. And this is going to spark the creation of another book called The Impending Crisis of the South. So we have not talked about this one yet. The Impending Crisis of the South was made by Hinton Helper. This book was meant to help and support low-income white Southerners. This is going to offend the South. He was a non-aristocrat, white from North Carolina. This book will be banned in the South. And he hated both slavery, but he hated blacks. And basically what he argues in this book is that slavery is bad for poor white farmers and that we just need to get rid of slavery because it's only the white rich people benefit from it. So it's a very populist book. But he was also super racist. So both of these books will cause conflict and controversy. During this time, we talked about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and we have Northerners moving into Kansas and Southerners moving into Kansas because they're about to have a vote to determine whether Kansas will be a free state or a slave state. So Kansas will be a state with a mix of Northerners and Southerners. The New England Emigrant Society will send 2,000 people to stall the South from further migration. Also, they'll vote against slavery. They also send them armed with weapons, Beecher's Bibles. The South is going to react violently by supporting a small group of angry slave owners from Missouri to go into Kansas. And what you're going to start happening is you're going to start having the Northerners kill the Southerners in Kansas. This is going to be Bleeding Kansas. So basically, Kansas is going to start to have a civil war from like 1855, 1856, all the way until like throughout the Civil War. Kansas starts the U.S. Civil War like 5 years early. And you have Northerners and Southerners killing each other in Kansas, Bleeding Kansas. During this time, the Kansas legislature is going to vote for the Lecompton Constitution. The Lecompton Constitution was kind of BS. What the Lecompton Constitution said, so in Kansas at the time, there was two legislative branches. There was a anti-slavery Congress in Kansas and a pro-slavery Congress, like Kansas was divided. The president is going to recognize the pro-slavery Kansas. They're going to pass the Lecompton Constitution. The Lecompton Constitution automatically guarantees slavery, so the people didn't even get a vote on whether they wanted slavery or not. And what's going to happen is this: the Constitution will be deadlocked. Some people will vote against it, and Kansas will not become a state until during the Civil War. And it'll just go through a series of violence and civil war within Kansas, bloody Kansas. During this time, not only are people killing each other in Kansas, they're beating each other up in Congress. Senator Charles Sumner was a big-time abolitionist. He's going to be hating on Congressman Brooks' relatives, Senator Butler, who was an old gentleman from South Carolina. Congressman Brooks was not happy that his relative was being insulted by this rascal abolitionist. So in the middle of the Senate, he goes there and starts beating him with a cane. And he beats him so much the cane breaks. Sumner has to leave Congress for like over a year. Like, it causes some pretty bad damage to him. And this just really shows like how divided the country is being. Congressmen start bringing guns with them, and they start bringing weapons with them when they go to Congress. They're that afraid. And really, like, the country is becoming more and more divided. In 1856, the Democrats will meet in Cincinnati, and they're going to choose James Buchanan as their presidential candidate. He's a Pennsylvania lawyer. He was an ambassador to London during the Kansas-Nebraska Act, so he wasn't smeared with that. He was super mediocre, irresolute, and he is not going to be decisive at all. The Republicans are going to choose John C. Frémont, who was one of the heroes of the Mexican-American War. He was a Catholic. He was an explorer, a soldier, a surveyor. There is going to be anti-foreignism in the campaign. Immigrants' arrival are going to alarm some of the nativists during this time. The Republican Party did have some nativist elements in their party, even though Frémont himself was Catholic. In the election of 1856, Frémont is going to win most of the North, and most of the West and most of the South goes to Buchanan, and the Democrats are going to win the election. Honestly, it's probably a good thing because Frémont was not very competent, and if there was a civil war in 1856, the North might have lost. There was a third party during this time. The third party was called the American Party. This was the anti-immigrant party, and it was formed by Millard Fillmore, another former president, and they got like one state. This did work out for the Republican Party, like I said, because they were not ready to run the government in 1856. Next thing, we have the Dred Scott Bombshell. In 1857, Dred Scott is going to sue for his freedom. He was a slave, but but his master took him all the way to Illinois and Wisconsin, and he lived there for over 5 years. Under that idea, since he lived in free soil, he should become a free man. Under the Missouri Compromise, there was no slavery there. The Supreme Court, under Justice Taney, who was appointed by Andrew Jackson, is going to rule that the previous compromises, like the Missouri Compromise, was unconstitutional. Slaves were inherently property. Slaves cannot slaves cannot sue for their freedom. They're just property, like horses and stuff like that. The Supreme Court decision will overrule all previous compromises, and basically it makes a lot of Northerners really afraid that slavery can exist anywhere now. This is a huge victory for the North, the Dred Scott decision. It's basically allowing slavery everywhere, and it's going to infuriate the Northerners. Along this time, there's a huge financial crisis in 1857. There's going to be the causes of the financial crisis of 1857 was inflation. All this gold was found in California. Overgrowth, overproduction of grain. Over-speculation in land and railroads. The North will be hit the hardest. The North is going to demand cheap land. They want to provide cheap land for like 25 cents an acre. This won't be passed until the Civil War, the Homestead Act. They want higher tariffs. The South actually will not be hurt during this time. So the South is going to come from the financial crisis of 1857 with a false confidence, thinking that cotton's king and that their economy is invincible. In 1858, the Democrat Stephen Douglas is going to run against the Republican Abraham Lincoln. Douglas is going to run to be reelected in the Senate, and Lincoln's going to be the Republican candidate for the Senate. In this election, Douglas and Lincoln will meet out, and they'll have debates against each other. These are called the Lincoln-Douglas debates. The most famous debate was at Freeport, Illinois, and this is where Stephen Douglas comes up with the idea of the Freeport Doctrine. Basically, what Lincoln did was he tried to trap Douglas in the debate, saying, because of the Dred Scott decision, your whole idea of popular sovereignty is null and void, because slavery can exist in any of the territories now. In this debate, Douglas basically says that the Dred Scott decision was wrong, and in the Freeport Doctrine, the people in the territory can vote for slavery despite what the Supreme Court says. And if the Supreme Court, if the people don't want slavery, they could just ignore the Supreme Court. This is actually going to upset a lot of Southerners, Democrats. So when Douglas becomes the presidential candidate in 1860, the Southerners don't like the fact that he wouldn't support the Dred Scott decision. So the Southern Democrats will break away from Stephen Douglas later on. In this election, Douglas is going to beat Lincoln, but this does make Lincoln a national candidate. He actually did really well in this election. And when 1860 comes, the Republicans are going to nominate him for president, even though he loses the Senate race. Let's talk about John Brown. John Brown was a zealous religious fanatic. He wanted to start a slave rebellion, which is a good thing. He earlier on in his life, he went to Potomac, Kansas, and he massacred all those people in Kansas. During the time of Bleeding Kansas, John Brown with his sons went to Kansas. He took a broadsword and him and his sons chopped and killed a couple of slave owners to death. They chopped their body up and threw it in the Potomac River. It's called the Potomac Massacre. In response, the South is going to destroy a whole anti-slavery town in the North. It's part of the whole Bleeding Kansas thing. In 1859, John Brown believes that he's being called to lead a slave rebellion in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He's going to lead a small rebellion. He's going to seize the federal arsenal, the weapons, in 1859. This rebellion, his insurrection will not be successful. He will be captured and he'll be convicted of treason by Virginia and he'll be executed. And really, the whole idea of John Brown, he's going to become very divisive. Some people thought he was a murderer. They thought he was insane. Some people thought he was a martyr for the anti-slavery cause. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is something, something, something. So really, he's even today, he's still a pretty divisive figure in American history. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry is going to cause a huge effect. This really frightens the Southerners. It makes them think that all Northerners are trying to lead slave rebellions. This is really pushes a lot of the Southerners to support secession and forming their own country. John Brown also becomes a martyr to some of the anti-slavery people, the abolitionists in the North. So, let's get to the last thing, the election of 1860. The Republicans are going to choose Abraham Lincoln after he ran for the Senate in 1858. The Republican platform is going to be made up of free soil. They want to do homestead, cheap land for people out west, non-extension of slavery into the territories. They want protective tariffs for northern manufacturers. And they want internal improvements. So a lot of their policies are very similar to Whig policies. In the election of 1860, there's going to be a third party called the Constitutional Union Party. The Constitutional Union Party was meant to be a moderate party between the extremists and the Democrats and the Republicans. One of the reasons the Democrats lose this election is the Democratic Party will split. Stephen Douglas is going to win the election for the Democratic nominee, but a lot of Southerners did not like Stephen Douglas because of the Freeport Doctrine, the idea that he would not support Dred Scott. So the Southern Democrats will split off and have their own nomination convention, and they'll nominate Breckinridge. Douglas and Breckinridge together had 365,000 more votes than Lincoln, but even if they had been together, they still would have lost the electoral votes. Lincoln is going to win the election of 1860, and he is going to be a minority president. In some of the states in the South, Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot. So remember, after a new president wins the election, there's a lame duck period before he's sworn in. So in between the time period when Buchanan is finishing up his term and before Lincoln is sworn in, South Carolina is going to secede. Some of the other southern states will secede. James Buchanan is not going to do anything about it. He thought he had no power to do anything. He's not going to try to stop South Carolina from seceding. And really, he just kind of dithers and does nothing. This is one of the reasons why James Buchanan is ranked as one of the worst presidents in American history. By the time Abraham Lincoln becomes president, there is one last proposal for compromise. This is called the Crittenden Compromise. The Crittenden Compromise was proposed by Senator James Henry Crittenden. This would have made a constitutional amendment that would have permanently protected slavery in where it already is. It would have been a constitutional amendment that would have permanently protected slavery where it already is. Abraham Lincoln is going to reject it. He's going to say, no, I'm not going to be held hostage by these 7 states, these little children that are seceding because they're unhappy because they finally lost an election. So Lincoln is going to reject the compromise, and we are going to start to see some southern states seceding from the Union, starting with South Carolina. After South Carolina will be Mississippi, then Florida, then Alabama, then Georgia, then Louisiana, and then Texas. These are all deep South states. These are black belt states. Some of the more northern South states or the middle South states are going to hold on and wait to see what happens, which we'll talk about in the next couple of classes. So we are at the point where the country has finally split and we're fixing to have a civil war. All right, kiddos, that is all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces. Deuces, yeah.